Hi, I'm Gabriele Ludwig, Director for Sustainability and Environmental Affairs with the Almond Board of California. Today I'll present some ways the almond industry has grappled with how to adapt to a changing environment. Almonds are one of those unique to California specialty crops. They're exclusively grown in the Central Valley of California on some 1.5 million acres, providing about 80% of the global almond supply. Almonds are grown by a diversity of growers, as there's over 7,000 growers, and there are about 100 handlers that process the almonds for entrance into the marketplace. We often get asked, why the Central Valley, or why exclusively the Central Valley? And almonds actually have a narrow range of preferred climate conditions. They need a cold but not too cold a winter for winter chill hours. As they're one of the first crops to bloom, they need a short enough winter to reduce frost risk. And they prefer hot and dry summers, so they're well adapted to the Mediterranean climate prevalent in the Central Valley. But about the Almond Board, it is a grower-enacted federal marketing order that's funded by a 3-cent per pound assessment. That means that the industry members participate in committees and they help decide where those dollars are spent, primarily in global marketing, but also in research, outreach, etc. And I think it's important to understand the industry would not be in the place it is if they had not been funding research now for nearly 50 years. And also realize that the only way that research program works is if we have access to research and extension institutions to work with. As we look to the potential impacts of climate change on almonds, risks, as many have noticed, is on the water supply side, as well as increased variability in weather, such as potential for increased frost events during bloom and shortly thereafter, as well as changes to the chilling hours. On the opportunity side, you have increased carbon storage, co-product usage, and even opportunities on the water supply and use side. So one of the first things to do is just simply to understand where's the energy and greenhouse gases associated with the growing of almonds. So we funded a life cycle assessment looking at all of the inputs involved with nursery, planting, and maintaining an orchard for 25 years. And this is work done by Alyssa Kendall from UC Davis. And from that, we learned a couple of key points. That one, at least to me, as expected, we value almonds as a high protein food. Means we use quite a bit of nitrogen, and so quite a bit of the greenhouse gases are associated with the nitrogen. Unexpected to me was I was not aware of how much energy is hidden in moving water. That's moving water within the orchard as well as getting water to the orchard. So those two learnings from the life cycle assessment emphasized to us that anything that helped improve water use efficiency as well as nitrogen use efficiency were key to reducing the overall carbon footprint. The other unexpected, at least learning, was the value of co-products. So the other things we grow in the orchard. So in this life cycle, at the time it was done, majority of orchard removals at the end of the went to cogeneration for electricity production, and almond hulls go to dairy feed. And those uses, the combination uses, those uses offset nearly 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with 25 years of growing almonds. So given that, we have really increased our research on finding value from those other things we grow at the same time when we're growing the kernels, so the hulls, the shells, and the tree. This gives you some idea of some of the things we've been looking at. Very diverse research portfolios. We're trying to get a better handle of what will work. One of those new uses for a key co-product is whole orchard recycling. That's where at the end of the orchard's life cycle, trees are ground up and incorporated into the soil prior to replanting. So in essence, trying to mimic what happens in a forest. And this is an idea that was driven by Brent Holtz. He's the guy in the hat in this picture, farm advisor in San Joaquin County. From the initial trial that's now been in the ground 10 years, where they compared chipping with burning, have data clearly showing improvements in soil quality, stored carbon, water holding capacity, but one of the more amazing pieces of data is actually showing cumulative yield improvements compared to the burn plots. Not easy to get, takes a lot of time because you're dealing with trees and you're dealing with soils. Having that information, actually, as we speak, we have video crews out in the orchard to develop outreach materials for whole orchard recycling. And some of our next steps are to look at what happens if we layer additional soil-focused practice onto whole orchard recycled orchards. And we are also looking at carbon credit markets in the private market sector. As I say, the other key risk is water. And really, as others have mentioned, the way I describe the water system in California is the infrastructure is set up to move water from the north to the south and from the winter to the summer. That winter storage is very much dependent on snowpack in the Sierra Nevada. And one of the predictions of climate change is that while it's roughly a similar amount of precipitation on average, more of it will be as rain, less of it as snow. So the key question for California, and this infrastructure has been key for California to be California, not just for ag, is how does California address this changing way water is going to be supplied? Are there ways to capture these rainfall events better? And in that context, again, about 6-7 years ago, we decided to take a look at to what extent almonds, given the amount of acres of almonds in the Central Valley, could be used for groundwater recharge. And the first primary question was really to what extent can the trees handle being in flooded conditions. It's not their favorite place to be. What we learned from the research is that, at least in the winter months, the trees can handle being flooded as long as it's sandy enough soil, which is also the kind of soil you'd really want to have for recharge to work well. Based on mapping along with analyses of soils information, roughly 50% of the acreage has the right soil condition. That doesn't necessarily mean it's at the right place in terms of access to flood flows, etc. Issues that we've learned from the work in terms of where the limits are is fundamentally once the trees have leafed out, which is typically around middle of March, that's when you start needing to put nitrogen on. And we haven't quite figured out how do you put nitrogen on and keep it in the root zone while you're putting water on that you want to go below the root zone. And then the other thing we're seeing in the recharge space is really it's more now policy questions around water rights, water trading, giving credit for someone who does recharge, etc. And the other aspect of water supply is how to ensure that any water that is used for irrigation is used as efficiently as possible. I believe what the Almond Board has done in this space is a key example of the kind of steps that are involved in really developing and adapting to changing conditions. So again, 5-6 years ago, since research was our forte, we spoke to experts as to where to invest in research, only to hear, can we get growers to do what we already know improves, and to some extent also nitrogen efficiency? Thus, based on that feedback, we spoke to farm advisors. We developed a list of 5 key practices we thought any almond grower could implement to some extent on their operation, thus the different levels of 1, 2, and 3. Those are further refinements. And then once we had that, we said, okay, well and how much is this adopted? We turned to the California Almond Sustainability Program, which is a grower self-assessment program, which asks growers, are you not using particular practices? And based on that, we could see that 3 of the key areas, there was not a high rate of adoption. And that really focused the attention on the need for outreach. So we have built a whole outreach system just for the continuum itself. Behind that document, there's like some 100-page binder really detailing how to do all of these different practices, where you can buy the equipment, how to maintain it, etc. We also have online irrigation tools, nitrogen calculator, videos, how-to videos, and so forth. And we invested in having people, like in this case, Tom Duvall, who do one-on-one or small group growers who really focus on grower outreach. Now, more recently, in parallel, we have updated our irrigation research strategy and really are interested in some of the new technologies where you can assess actual evapotranspiration to determine when and how much to irrigate rather than essentially a calculated version of it. And we're also interested in using technology to see if we can make things like monitoring plant water status easier, be able to irrigate more precisely to differences in varieties and soil types, etc. Having had this experience in the irrigation space, the board of directors then said, hey, and also looking at the larger conversation going on, how do we move the needle and take the almond industry to the next level? And with that, encourage the setting of goals in 4 areas: water, air quality, waste, and pest management. And we're now on the journey, both figuring out how to encourage growers to make changes in these 4 areas in their growing practices, as well as to track those changes over time. Which brings us to what encourages a grower to try a new practice or adopt new practices. It's easy when the new way of doing things, you have data that shows it improves their bottom line or makes their lives easier in some way. Difficult when there are upfront costs and benefits down the line, and more difficult when, especially like in the regulatory arena, there are economic costs and it's not clear that there's any benefit to them. There are incentives out there. One was talked about is, can we get consumers to pay more? Be upfront with you, growers are price takers, they're not price makers. It's been very difficult to see any movement in that arena. There are various incentive programs that help, especially if you have the moderate kinds of programs, NRCS, CDFA, and San Joaquin Valley Air District. Currently exploring, can we get some private ecosystem markets developed, especially as companies have set standards for themselves and they realize they can't achieve those goals if they don't have help upstream, and the growers are saying, well, if we're going to do something for you, we should probably get some funding for it. And then there may be some opportunities, as mentioned, like with insurance or CEQA markets. I think in short, you really need to acknowledge that growers are constantly managing risk in a highly variable and complex natural and economic environment. They tend to be game to innovate if it makes economic sense. And then realizing that at least almonds, we strongly feel that our success has been built on having a functional research and extension institutions. Fundamentally, it's about building trust.